In this video, I thought I would give you a bit of background about the Museum of Timekeeping, where we started out, how we came to be, and what our plans are for the future as well. I'm going to do this in a series of 4 questions, which my glamorous assistant Dan is going to read out to me. Off we go.
Why was the BHI set up?
Well, the BHI, the British Horological Institute, was set up in 1858, and it was set up as a direct response to a series of threats that the British horological industry were facing. Firstly, Britain was not quick off the bat when it came to revolutionising the way that it produced watches and clocks. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, British horology was really at the forefront of the horological world. We were producing, as a country, the best watches, the best clocks. We were the best in terms of precision timekeeping as well. But we weren't mass producing these items. We were very much working on bespoke pieces, especially crafted pieces for individuals, rather than the mass production market. It wasn't until much later, really at the beginning of the 1900s, that we began looking at ways that we could encroach on this market, and that was simply too slow. By the 1840s, both Switzerland and the United States had begun mass producing watches, which meant for the first time anybody could buy a decent pocket watch that would be an accurate timekeeper, really for just a few pennies. The second major threat to be facing the industry was the way in which horology was taught. If you were to embark on an apprenticeship in modern times, you would expect to spend between 4 and 6 years working closely with a master craftsperson who would teach you the trade, and at the end of this you would have acquired the knowledge needed to be a master in your own right. Not so much for horology in the 19th century, where an apprentice could expect to spend anywhere between 8 and 20 years working near to a master horologist, but not learning necessarily directly from them. While those relationships did exist in some cases, it was far more common for apprentice horologists simply to have access to the workshop and workspaces, meaning that they were almost teaching themselves, which led to a very ineffective way of knowledge sharing. The founders of the British Horological Institute realised that coupled together, these were not conducive to effective working, especially in an ever-changing working environment during the Industrial Revolution. They set up the British Horological Institute first and foremost to educate people about the skills, crafts, art and technology needed to build a watch or a clock or a timepiece. They also set about trying to amass a collection of watches and clocks and timepieces, ephemera, tools, and also a library, so that they could show the public what it was to be a horologist and what horology meant to society. Along with this, they also set up a series of lectures, again specifically looking at sharing knowledge and information. This, coupled with their distance learning course, which was taken up by students all over the world, really set the British horological industry in much better standing on the world stage.
How did they end up in Upton Village?
When the British Horological Institute was formed, they first bought a property on Northampton Square, which is in Clerkenwell in London. In the 19th century, and for many hundreds of years before, Clerkenwell was really the centre for innovative technologies around horology. The Clerkenwell building was perfect for their needs at the time. The British Horological Institute then were just running the correspondence courses, where materials and textbooks were sent out to students who then did the work in their own workshops and returned by post. However, they wanted to branch out. Not only did they want to branch out, there were some issues with the building itself. Although it didn't receive any direct damage during the Blitz, The row of buildings that it was a part of did, and this meant that slowly but surely over the next couple of decades, the cracks quite literally began to appear in the walls. Those people who I know who remember the Clerkenwell building remember well that by the time the BHI left that building, you could get your fist into the cracks in the walls on the upper floors. The price during the 1960s to get that building renovated so that it was fit for purpose was astronomical. We're talking well over £100,000, which in the 1960s was simply insurmountable for the BHI. They began to look further afield for buildings that might suit their purposes and enable them to branch out into new areas. By this point as well, the Horological Institute weren't just located in London. They had branches all over the country, from the south coast right up to Scotland. So it was decided that perhaps somewhere more central would be suitable for the headquarters. Nottinghamshire seemed like a good fit. It's pretty much central to everywhere in the country. And when Upton Hall came on the market for the princely sum of £32,000, they realised that they really weren't going to get any better than that and snapped it up. It needed a lot of work doing. It had been left empty for a few years. However, what this now afforded them was the space to set up the museum, the space to hold on-site lessons for the first time. It had a ballroom suitable for lectures, rooms for offices, libraries, a live-in quarters for a caretaker. I mean, it really was a huge step up in terms of what the BHI could now do.
What is in the museum collection?
The museum collection is vast. Started in 1858 when the BHI were formed, there was an active collections policy right through until 2016, which meant that anything that was offered to the museum within reason was accepted. The museum collection is solely based around horology. It is very subject specific, and we have strict policies in place to ensure it stays that way. On display at the museum, there are around 300 clocks and watches, with a further 3,000 to 5,000 in stores. The very first objects to be donated to the museum were 2 chronometers. The first is a Mudge copy chronometer, which was donated by the Admiralty right back in 1868. And this was donated to the museum, well, to the British Horological Institute's museum, specifically for students to learn about how chronometers work, with the intention that perhaps this one could be played around with by the students. Fortunately, the directors of the Institute at the time saw that an object of this sort of level of quality was not suitable for students, and so it went into storage. It remained in the safe at the museum until 2020, when it came out on display for the first time. It's one of only a handful of Mudge copy chronometers known to still exist, and it is a very fine precision scientific instrument. The other chronometer is a Thomas Earnshaw chronometer. Now, Thomas Earnshaw, he was one of the earlier chronometer builders, and he improved upon the design of John Harrison by adding a bimetallic strip around the outside of the escapement, which helped to compensate for changes of temperature and relative humidity in the air, which a ship would encounter on a transatlantic journey. These chronometers, the Earnshaw model, was still in use right up until the 1970s, when GPS really took over as the standard navigation mechanism within ships at sea. So, hugely important piece, and again was given over to the museum, purchased in fact by the early directors of the museum as one of their star pieces, and that also went on display for the first time in 2020, so both of those chronometers can be seen if you visit the museum now. Otherwise, the collection contains a great number of watches demonstrating the improvements from very early English fusee watches right through to the Apple Watch, for example, although a little contentious as to whether that is truly horology or not. We also have the world's only complete collection of speaking clocks, a number of wonderful church and public clocks ranging from the 1680s. We have a Richard Roe of 1686, which is a door frame church clock, right through to modern electric church clocks. And then on top of that, we have the wonderful collection that you can handle as well. So we have a real hands-on collection, again, mostly of watches, but also of tools and other ephemera that you can come and really get a feel for the skills involved with producing horological escapements and machines.
You mentioned that the BHI established a library. Is that still going?
It is indeed, yes. And at the moment, the museum are in the lengthy process of cataloguing and digitalising the library archives. We believe that there are around 2,000 book volumes in the library, and on top of that, there are many hundreds of archival entries as well. The largest archive that we hold is the archive of the collector Courtenay Ilbert. Ilbert's archive came to the museum some years ago after his death, and there are some incredible pieces within that collection, including collections of handwritten letters from the early 18th century, books and pamphlets from the 17th century. I mean, it is truly a wondrous collection, and I'm hoping that as soon as we finish up getting that digitalised, we can get portions of it online for the public to see. In the meantime, we will be posting from time to time snippets as we come across them in the build-up to the public opening of the library.
What are the aims of the museum?
Over the last few years, the museum has worked really hard to improve accessibility, to improve the number of days that we're open, to improve and update our exhibition spaces as well, to ensure that when people visit, they are seeing inclusive and up-to-date interpretation, really showing the best of what we are. We are a museum who are here to teach you and show you how interesting horology is, and that it's not just about the technological advances, as important as they are, but also there are some fascinating social history stories tied in there as well. When the museum separated from the BHI and was put into public trust in 1994, I'm not sure anyone expected us to get as far as we have. We're now open 2 days a week, and with a programme like this of digital content, we're hoping to reach wider and wider audiences all the time. My aims as manager for the museum are to ensure that within 5 years' time we'll be self-sufficient financially. Quite an ask, but I think we can get there, and that also we are offering a full range of programmes including a schools programme, including outreach programmes, and a lot of downloadable material as well, so that there are learning resources there available to the public. So it's really a case of watch this space. We're right at the beginning of a really long journey, but it's going to be a good one.